So I'm very happy to be doing a dialogue today with Aaron Kleinerman, and as part of the series on a new men's liberation. And I came across Aaron actually on my Facebook feed, and I saw an advertisement and some testimonials about a retreat he was doing in Spain, which is just next door to where I'm based here in Portugal. And yeah, I was very struck that it sounded very deep, very authentic. Some of the subjects and modalities that Aaron was using definitely resonated with some of the things I do with men on my retreats. So so I did a bit of research, and it looks like we resonate in many ways about the importance of a new men's liberation and a culture of initiation for men in these tipping point times. So to begin, I'd just like to ask you, Aaron, if you could say a little bit about yourself, your journey, just how you ended up doing the work you're doing with men.
Yeah, I mean, I went to actually a merchant marine academy back in the U.S. So I was there's probably about 80% men in the academy I went to, and grew up outside of Boston. Always had a strong, desire to understand more about human behavior, but then somehow found myself navigating big cruise ships and container ships around the world, kind of, you could say, finding my soul for the first time on the ocean. Um, and did a master's degree in spiritual psychology in my early 20s in Southern California. That's often the place you go for such things. And yeah, there was always just this curiosity to understand more of like who we are and what's going on. Had a number of mentors. I worked for a big self-development publishing company in my early 20s at the same time, helping people transform a lot of their abuses and traumas and situations, finding gratitude through some of life's biggest challenges. And it just really dove me deep into this whole field of transformation and how can we shift and, you could say, become a better version or really remember who we really are, whatever words are there. Got disillusioned for a long time, went back out to sea, it was like, I don't want anything to do with this industry. Years later, ayahuasca came in my world, and she was like, I know you're having fun and you're doing the maritime thing, but maybe you can go be in service again. And I said, all right, I can do that. So I kind of merged back into this world. And yeah, I what I found especially was that from my own experience and also just the inquiries that were coming forth for me were from a lot of men, especially around sexuality, just wanting to have a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation, really learning how to navigate and master the human experience more. And it was from a lot of my own journey that, I wasn't trying to step into this world. It just kind of led me in this direction. And now, I'm almost 10 to 11 months out of the year, I'm traveling and doing workshops and retreats and, festivals, and really just supporting people. I'd say essentially to remember the wisdom of their soul and to get out of our own way and to have a deeper mastery. And most of probably 80% of the clients and, retreats and things I worked with tend to be men as well. So this one that you mentioned is called the initiation journey. One of my intentions in that is no stone goes unturned. So all of the deepest fears and taboos and worries that are inside of a man's body, we get to really somatically dive into. My 20-year-old maritime self probably never would have thought I'd be doing work like this, but it's what my soul has led me to. So I just try to get out of my own way and keep moving forward.
Yeah, great. And be great if you could share a little bit about, more specifically about the kind of work you're doing, because you just
Yeah.
mentioned somatic work, and obviously, yeah, that's a big area. That's definitely, it's one thing for men to sit in a circle and open up and be vulnerable. That's quite rare, but actually to open up to actually being willing to be held or touched, or love and affection to be expressed, that kind of intimacy between men, of course, is yeah, it's usually there's a lot of armoring
Hmm.
around
Hmm.
all of that. So Yeah, share a little bit about what you do with men in these retreats.
Yeah, you know, I think a framing towards that I witnessed in my own journey was there was an aspect of me as a being that I know how to be alpha. I was a drill instructor at one point. I know how to lead man. I know how to be directive. I knew how to that. But the more tender parts, the ones you were just saying, I wasn't as well like aware of it. You could say more receptivity. And the thing I've noticed in culture and just our society, and I'll frame it this way, people listening may or may not resonate, but I feel like the most undeveloped, unhealthy, feminine energy is in a man's body.
Mm.
And so often, what I see men who come to a men's circle initially, like there's a desire to talk and let their voice be spoken, and that's beautiful. I love that. And what I was noticing and going to a lot of men's circles was I wanted to go deeper. I'm like, okay, I hear your story, but like, what's underneath that? Like, what's going on underneath that? What's really like bubbling, almost beyond a space of words? So for several years now, when I am living in one city, which isn't often these days, I often hold these circles of like embodiment for men, and we'll do like a round of first sharing, and then the second round is like really an invitation to go beyond the words into the body. And it's a place of just recognizing that our mind can have such a deep understanding of things, but often our body is still trying to catch up. And I noticed in my own journey in my early 20s when I was studying with some of the greatest minds and teachers and, mentors that I could get my hands on, I understood all these concepts, but still my relationships and things, there was still some friction and some challenge.
Yeah.
So it was like my mind understood one thing, but my body was still like, yeah, maybe, a 15 or 17-year-old. So creating spaces in these retreats that give men an opportunity to get out of the mind and into the body and into the mystery of the body and the weirdness and the strangeness and the expression and all of that. I feel more and more in holding places like that and inviting men in that way, there's something else that lands. There's a deeper, you could say, initiation that happens. There's a deeper integration that begins to emerge, where there's a cellular shift that happens inside the body that can't necessarily always be, explained cognitively. And that's when I see that and I can witness it, it's like, okay, this is why I'm doing this work.
Yeah, yeah, that's I can really relate to that too. And it's interesting that you said a cellular shift, because it reminds me of this phrase that Jed Diamond mentioned. He was the first guy I interviewed. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's been doing men's work for 40 years.
Hmm.
And it was actually a phrase from Robert Bly,
Mm-hmm.
who was one of the pioneers of the men's movement in the 70s, 80s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this phrase called the song that male cells sing. And that really captures something for me. And I think this is what you're also sharing, tapping into. It's something about, yeah, when men get out of their kind of mental, verbal mechanism, let's say, through
Mm-hmm.
which we're usually trying to understand and navigate through the world, and open up to this kind of, you could say, heartfelt vulnerability, which obviously includes not only feeling and emotion, but also embodiment. That there's a cellular shift, as you say,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
something happens in the room or in the space energetically
Mm-hmm.
that is undeniable, but can't really be you know quantified, let's say, or
Yeah,
easily
exactly.
explained. So yeah, very much resonate with that. So what are some of the modalities and practices you're using to catalyze this?
Well, a big piece I utilize is definitely working with the group dynamic. I feel like when a group of men come together, most of these retreats, it tends to be 20 to 25 guys, so it's big enough, but it's also small enough where a sense of intimacy can be there and a place where guys can begin to let down the mass. I teach a lot in this field of Tantra, which can be very misunderstood. But
Mm.
in my perspective, and the definition that always speaks to me the most is, to weave.
Yeah.
So it's to weave all these different disciplines together. And there's a lot of tools on the tool belt from the last 15 years of doing this work. And, I think the greatest tool or practice is the gift of presence. There's a saying in a field of Tantra where it's like, all of you is welcome.
Mm.
So when, men show up into this retreat or to a circle and they can feel that, their wildness and they're crazy and they're soft and they're tender, and all those parts are fully welcome to be seen and to be heard and to be felt,
Mm.
then something, it's like a permission field opens.
Yeah.
So we go into, somatic practices. We do some, you could say some regression timeline, past, earlier lifetime, early childhood type healing stuff. Sometimes it's in partners, sometimes it's in group, sometimes it's on their own. But really the essence always being, let us understand. So I'll give some discourse and some framing about, the concepts we're moving in. And then I invite people into the body. I work a lot with the unconscious, in shadow work. It's something that, I've studied a lot with, as well as, really navigating into some of the deeper traumatic wounds. I find, especially for these initiation retreats, I completely tackle sexuality. Like, it's very much on the table. And the thing that I've also seen in the men's work field, and not to negate it, but when I've looked at Mankind Project and some of these other bigger groups, it's not like there's a big sexuality component, because I think sexuality still has a big kind of hidden taboo.
Mm.
And what I've, confronted in my own journey, as well as being led by, a few mentors a while back, was like to really put all of that there, and then to dive into it and to really embrace it. The level of brotherhood that comes together is far greater. Like, out of all of the different retreats and things I teach through the year, the brotherhood coming together in those is far beyond I can ever actually understand. I think partly because once those taboos around homophobia and trust and sexuality can actually be like experienced and moved through, then there's just this softening and this safety that lands into the body that's almost undescribable.
Yeah. Right. Right. And well, seeing you mentioned the sexuality theme, let's dive a bit deeper into that, because I agree with you. I think, well, of course, culturally, we're kind of in this crazy situation in the West, I feel, where um, you have this sort of sex positive culture, in the sense that sex is everywhere. We're being stimulated all the time by advertising, all the rest of it. And yet at the same time, that's pasted on top of this very sex negative, more traditional culture, particularly through Christianity and etc.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, a lot of men, a lot of women who would even presume themselves to be, let's say, sexually liberated relatively, or progressive, it's often not really the case.
Mm.
It's just on the surface, and there's all kinds of, as you say, taboos and insecurities. And I think, just to focus on men, men don't generally, well, men might talk about sex and women quite a bit, but usually it's not in this sort of deeper relational context. It's more the whole macho jerk, bravado kind of thing. And yeah, one of the things we've discovered in our work is that there's something about when we open up and share both our sexual challenges and experience, that while of course there's all these differences, somewhat everyone has maybe a kind of particular experience or challenge, but essentially we're all the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just this recognition, oh, you have that too, oh, you struggle with that too, oh right, and it just, as you said, then it just, there's a whole deep field of relaxation, and suddenly this topic that despite the fact that sex is everywhere, is still kind of presumed to be the most personal thing, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
and therefore, you know, not something you would just necessarily freely expose. You know, it
Yeah.
becomes very impersonal
Hmm.
in a sense, and then that frees up, yeah, as you said, just this intimacy, and it frees up those energies that are usually locked up, you know, to do with I've got to be a certain way to be a man or to please my woman, or whatever it is.
Hmm. Hmm.
So and I'm with you in terms of tantra. I think it's very, very misunderstood. Um, but I like the definition that you also like of the weave,
Hmm.
and particularly the weave of the masculine and feminine, not only man and woman, but within, you know, a man in terms of himself, a woman in terms of herself, and then the wider understanding that comes obviously from India, you know, of Shiva Shakti, that
Hmm.
everything that is,
Yeah.
that arises is the feminine,
Yeah.
and that that pure witness consciousness is the masculine.
Yeah. And the two sort of polarities that I work a lot with men on, you could say one would be the dark penetrative power that's inside of a man's body that often has a certain level of denial. We almost deny kind of that animal strength and that power. You could put it around warrior, but almost beyond that to a place that's like just knows how to walk into a room and penetrate through anything that's not love.
Right.
Often when society thinks of penetration, we think of some male or male dominated organization trying to have power over others.
Right.
So it's really a deep dive into power, that power, when it's shared, and the power of penetration is actually a great gift that can annihilate things in front of itself, that creates more synergy and love. So that would be one. And then we dive deep into kind of the what I would call the younger, tender feminine inside of a man's body that might be a little bit afraid and timid, and doesn't know how to express her needs and doesn't know how to communicate how she feels. When I'm saying she, I'm saying that essence that's alive in a man's body. In
Yeah.
that reference point, that I feel the greatest thing I've come across in this field of Tantra and development is that if this inner union, this masculine and feminine inside of me, isn't in a symbiotic relationship, then I usually will have challenges in my outer relationship, whether that's in business, whether that's in romance. So the more that this inner union for a man is in congruency and talking, and it's not always this projection of trying to find some woman on the outside that's gonna make my world better and all this and all the things that the Hollywood dream has kind of taught us. So what happens when this becomes whole, and then I can meet the outside world and I can connect in a way that isn't from a needy little girl inside, which is, I think, is one of the deepest shadows for men, is this part that usually comes out in relationship when finally the man's like, oh, I can let go a little bit, and then this feminine essence like, oh, my needs matter too, and they do matter, but they often come across as very unhealthy and not well developed, because they're not. She inside hasn't really had a seat at the table for most of a man's life. She's been pushed down and chastised and buried away, and like, no, 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 I have to be the space holder. I am Shiva. I am everything. And it's like, hi, I'm here as well. Like, listen to me, hello. So that to me is really a feminine initiation that I think is necessary for a man's body, that
Yeah.
actually makes him more strong and certain and direct. And this is coming from a guy that came from a maritime military background. Like,
Yeah.
I wanted nothing to do. I'm like, I know how to be alpha, I know how to lead, I know how to direct. And when someone was saying, oh yeah, just surrender into your feminine, I was like, fuck you, what are you talking about, dude? None of that. But I realized that there were so many edges there that actually expanded me, that made my masculine more strong and on point, and I was able to hold a greater wavelength, a greater expansion of polarity inside of me,
Yeah,
which then makes life just that much more fun.
yeah, yeah, beautiful. And this whole exploration and dance of polarity, both let's say within the male psyche, and then in relationship to women. Yeah, I think this is a fascinating one, and something I've been becoming more and more convinced of as I work with this collective, but also doing these interviews, is you know, we need a masculine culture that catalyzes and magnifies and deepens both the masculine and the feminine
Mm,
polarity. And it also very much depends on the man and his cultural background, you know. So, you know, generally I'm sure you'd agree, in the more postmodern liberal progressive sort of cultures, you know, a lot of the men who would consider themselves spiritual guys, you know, I was one of these, you know. I remember growing up and in my early 20s, this whole thing of being a man, it just seemed irrelevant to me. It was like, well, I'm interested in enlightenment. You know, what's that got to do with any, doesn't really make any difference. And, but as I was growing up, I spent most of my 20s traveling around the world and just exploring all kinds of things. And, you know, I had a lot of men friends where we could have a good time. You know, we could party, we could get high, we could play music, you know, but it couldn't really go beyond a certain, you know, boundary in terms of any intimate relational depth.
hmm
And,
hmm
and then, of course, I generally found that with women friends. And, but then, of course, there's the whole sexual dynamic, often made that somewhat complicated.
hmm
And it was only when I joined a spiritual community when I was age 27, and we had a men's groups and women's groups. And when I would join this men's group, it was such a relief in a way that I never knew. There was something I never knew I was longing for.
hmm
And I also find with men who join the Awakened Line men's collective I'm leading, that's the most resounding similarity in all the men that join, is this sense of at last, you know. And they realize they've been longing for something that they weren't fully conscious of,
hmm
which is
hmm
to be able to be with men, to be in a brotherhood where there's that positive masculine pole, and to open up to this tenderness, to this vulnerability that you're speaking about, that's all welcomed. As you said, you know, you can bring everything to the path. That's the tantric way. And so it's been interesting though, because I find with some men, and this was definitely the case for me, what's needed is a more of a confrontation, an initiation, you could say, that brings the masculine online, brings the warrior online, you know, like toughen up, man up, take responsibility, you know. And you know, for some men it might be more of, you know, because I'm in Portugal here, it's interesting, in some ways it's not so postmodern, you know. So it's a more patriarchal, a bit more macho culture here than Northern Europe, for example. So, you know, for men just to be vulnerable, or just to open up and say, actually, I need help, or I don't know, you know.
Those three words? Trouble for a man? No, I have never met any men like that.
No, and it's been interesting in the interviews because I interviewed this guy, Mark Binet. I don't know if you've heard of him. And really great. We had a great time. We have a sort of common sort of spiritual background somewhat. But he's doing this, he's got this whole academy called the Academy for Dominant Men and Submissive Women, or something like that. And he's really pushing up against the postmodern depolarization, you know. And I think there's a lot to this. I think part of the reason we're in such a cultural crisis is that men have become so weak and so easily manipulated, you know, and you know, and have lost their, you know, not only their Shiva in terms of presence, but also their balls, you know, as you
Exactly.
point to in your book. So you know, but in his work, he would say, for example, well, for a man, he shouldn't talk about his feelings. Really, that's going to
Mm.
depolarize him.
Hmm.
And I would say, yes, probably not with your woman, you know,
Mm.
but that's why you need some brothers. You need a men's culture where you can, you know, deal with your stuff, you know, um,
Hmm.
bring some of these shadows to light, and so you don't have to work it all out with your woman, because that is going to interfere with a healthy polarity. So wonder what
Yeah,
you think
no,
about
I agree to definitely pieces of that. I see, you know, I was living down in Australia for a while, which is definitely a very like
that. Oh yeah.
machismo culture, and guys that, you know, like even thought of, like, of talking about feminine, they're like, what are you, homo? Like, what's wrong with you? You know, that's just the nature of it. So I can see the benefit of the strong machismo, you know, dominant side of the masculine, but I don't think it needs to be either or. Like my
Right.
being, I can walk into a room and I can, you know, fully become that dark masculine dominant penetrative power. I can also completely surrender into like the tears and the vulnerability of my feminine. Both I think are extremely powerful. The challenge that I find, I just had a dear brother who was assisting my last retreat who, you know, is very much in this, a young guy, he's in this like and, you know, at one point we went through one of the rituals and he's like, vulnerability is also power. And I was like, yes, it's not like there's this thought that I think happens where somehow if I'm vulnerable, then I become weak.
Exactly.
And the only way I can be strong is if I assert my dominance. And like in my perspective, I think humanity in the world has had enough, you know, strongly assertive, masculine essence trying to have power over others, that there's a new way for something new. My
Yeah.
personal feel is, and when I speak into the feminine, it's, you know, it's a feminine and all, but like that leadership that arises from the unknown that needs structure and form. It's like that dominant structure, the bones in our body needs the water, needs the flow. The water in our body needs the bone. We can't have one without the other.
Right.
So in my perspective, when I come across things that are like, no, it's like, okay, but there's the other side. Unless we're speaking into the equanimous nature of this universe that we live in, then we live in illusion.
Yeah.
So I like that was such a strong ingrained principle that I began to understand at a young age. And actually, the way we transcend these polarities is having gratitude and an embodiment for both of them.
Mm.
You know, and the embodiment for both of them actually then opens up a channel where the essence of somebody can actually be revealed.
Yeah.
And, you know, and everyone's on their own journey and they're finding their own way, and it's all evolutions and growths and, you know, meeting these new edges. But that's just, you know, from my perspective, and doing this for a while, I feel like that necessity of knowing both sides of the polarities inside so deeply and intimately that I can be in either one completely and deeply.
Yeah, great. I totally resonate with that. I think what you described has also been, I'd say, the core learning, and again, the sort of revelation for men when men get involved in this, is that vulnerability equals strength
Mm-hmm.
and not weakness. And that turns something on its head in terms of the male psyche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When one really discovers that, and of course it opens up a trust, a profound trust
Mm.
in one's brothers in a context of men, but also a potentially deeper trust in women.
Mm.
You know, like I don't have to hold all the have all hold my armor up, you know, in order to be strong. And yeah, just to say a little bit more about what, based on what you were saying, yeah, it's definitely it's my ongoing experience, and this is quite mysterious, is that the more we as men embody both sides of this polarity within ourselves, then actually our masculine polarity, you could say an awakened masculine polarity, becomes even stronger. So in essence, we become more attractive,
Mm-hmm.
more powerful, and more polarized. But it's an integrated man.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a
Mm-hmm.
macho. It's not a macho jerk or just a dominant man who's very polarized to a more, submissive, nurturing woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah. So it's amazing to see that the more men open up to love and vulnerability and tenderness,
Mm.
and become radiant. That kind of opening to softness and radiance. At the same time, there's a strength that shines through that is very strong. It's very penetrating,
Mm-hmm.
as you said earlier, but it doesn't have any hard edges.
Mm.
And then it's inherently welcoming. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the women feel drawn to that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
more able to trust a strong man. Because those hard edges, are not being animated. And so,
Yeah.
just to give Mark Benny credit, because in his approach, he talks about dominance with devotion,
Mm-hmm.
first in devotion, devotion to the feminine. And I
Mm.
totally resonate with that. But I also think this aspect of vulnerability, especially between men, is just such an important part of the puzzle, because you can be very, very devoted to women and the feminine. But I think this vulnerability that we're talking about, at best, it's discovered and opened up between men.
Absolutely. And the thing that I've come to recognize with that, and this is where I see a lot of challenge that happens in relationships, because, I'll talk into a normal heteronormative relationship. So strong man with, beautiful, powerful, but like also goddess woman. And she's saying to him, I want to feel you more. I want to feel you more. And he's like, okay, all right, I'm gonna try to feel more. I'm gonna feel more. And then in the moment, whenever that's, let's say, 5% of the time, or in some moment when he's like, okay, I keep hearing my woman, she's telling me to feel more. And then he then feels more. Now, in that moment, if the female body's masculine hasn't developed enough to be able to witness without judgment, and you could say, quote, hold space, whatever
Yeah.
that means for you, then that moment when that tender essence is coming out of the man, it's meeting this masculine essence in the woman, which is really at the contrasexual self, which is an area where the most level of friction happens in most relationships. And so, if that's met with judgment, ridicule, blame, or shame, imagine that essence. That's this young, tender essence in the man's body is like, it's not safe to come out, because when I come out of this body, I'm not met with love, I'm met with judgment.
Right.
So that's often what men experience, which then tries to put on this bigger shell, this bigger hard hat, this bigger, I'm the man, I'm never going to show my tenderness because that's terrible. So what you're speaking into is one of the things I witness is that the feminine essence inside a man's body, she trusts more the masculine in a man's body than the masculine in a female's body. And so
Right.
this is one of the beautiful gifts that happen in men's circles and men's retreats and things, is that that feminine essence is like, oh, I can grow up a little bit more here. I can express how I feel. I can be a little bit messy, and I'm not going to get ridiculed by others. I'm actually just going to be in this beautiful, loving soup of brotherhood and connection. And because all of the other men there have the same level of insecurity. And so what happens as a result of that is there's literally a growing up and a maturing of that essence inside the man. So therefore, that inner union develops and matures, which then makes the masculine essence of the man more strong and more to have more capacity to do what a man is supposed to do, whatever that means in society.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're sold one thing, but we need another. This exact principle, like in my book, the Embodied Man, like chapter 7 is awakening the inner queen. Like I would never put that on the title of the book. Guys would never pick it up. It's like, who the fuck is this guy? I want a queen. But like I take them through a journey to a point of like, you need to honor that queen inside, or else you're always going to be having, the frustration, the annoyance of the queen on the outside. Because most men, they project all of their own feminine onto their partner, and they make her their world. And then when she doesn't do what you want, and she leaves or she does this, it's like this grasping love addict part comes out that's super unhealthy and super unloved and super like, and the man's like, oh my god, what was that thing that just came out of me? I was really uncomfortable, I don't want to see that anymore. And he tries to deny it.
Right.
And this is generally where so much of the issues that I find arise for a lot of men, especially when it comes to deep relating.
Yeah. 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 Really fantastic. Yeah, we're very much on the same thread with this. Yeah, because another way to frame it is, in postmodern culture, obviously, there was a lot positive that came out of feminism. Goes without saying, but in postmodern culture, there's this general feeling that we're the cause of everything that's wrong. Patriarchy, and so and as we know, there's a whole kind of, I believe it's actually an agenda, um, it's kind of a war on masculinity,
Mm.
culturally, let's say broadly in the media culture. And we have this phrase toxic masculinity, and so many men feeling confused, and as you say, then their women are telling them, well, you need to feel more, and what does that mean? I can remember I can remember when I was first presenting that challenge, it was like, I was like, feel what?
What do you want me to feel?
I'm British as well, and like the British are like, talk about emotional illiteracy. I mean, just to get in touch with that, you're actually feeling something, let alone express it. That was quite a learning. But of course, where that whole kind of emphasis, you got to feel more, it ends up with this idea we have with sharing your emotions, and we become these sensitive new age guys. A lot of men do, with their gentle voices,
Mm.
and in all the work I've done over the years with this kind of transformational work, it's always been very interesting to see that it's the very gentle, sensitive new age guys, they're the angry ones, actually. You,
Yeah.
you poke a little bit and whoa,
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Mm-hmm.
just so much of that is just a mask, the social conditioning, of what we're being told it means to be a more sensitive spiritual man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, and so there's this whole depolarization of the sexes, of course, women becoming over masculinized. I mean, I remember growing up, going to university in London in the 80s, and you're walking through the corridor, and I would naturally hold the door open for a woman behind me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't think about it. You don't have to do that for me. How dare you?
Why would you do such a chivalrous thing?
And I remember even the women's toilets, it was spelled MOWYN instead
Uh-huh.
of men, things like this. And just so many women who unconsciously don't realize how they've become kind of hard,
Mm.
and as you say, one symptom of that is this being very judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
and of their men. And so then we have this popular idea of the war of the sexes, and another popular idea, which apparently this is something the Dalai Lama said also, that the salvation of the Western world depends on women being in more positions of power.
Mm,
This idea that we've made a mess of it, so we need more women to kind of take over, basically.
mm, mhm.
And while I think obviously there's some truth to that, of course, there's something very positive about women having that kind of influence. But yeah, it's more and more. I feel that it's kind of working it out between the sexes.
Mm,
While there's been some, let's say, evolutionary advance from traditional culture, of course, it's we have to, when we have to go to the men's tent, the women have to go to the women's tent, and the women have to discover what leadership means, what feminine power means, not in relation and in opposition and reaction to us,
yes, exactly.
and the same obviously for us. And then this is also what I'm very interested in terms of the bigger and deeper picture culturally, is like what kind of new culture could we create as men and women,
Hmm.
where we carry forward the best of postmodern learnings, and increased sensitivity and all of that, but we actually bring a healthy instinctual polarity, back online in a fully embodied
Hmm.
way. and
Yeah.
then and then it's not going to be about equality. It's not going to be about balance of power. That's just not
Mm-hmm.
the point. That's actually depolarizing,
Mm,
and then we'll find out what it'll look like and what it'll mean.
mm, mm. Yeah, and it brings about the other side of this, like walking on eggshells feeling I think a lot of men experience of like being told to be really strong and please fuck me to God, but then please feel at the same time. And man's like, where do I go? What do I do? What's going on? And that's this, I think, sense that's kind of lost in society as well, because there is a necessity for a strong, powerful, assertive masculine that steps up, that knows how to lead, that can do so. But the quality of leadership and just what I'm hearing, I think, in the shift forward is it's coming from a different heart-centered space. It's
Right.
still just as powerful,
Right.
but the dynamic, I think, a lot of times when we look at leadership is like, I need to lead, they need to be small so I can be big. And this is one of the big, pieces I work a lot, in my retreats and with clients and things, is like this conversation of power. Because you can be really powerful, I can be really powerful, and we can actually merge together to be powerful together. And often from the old kind of belief in masculinity is like, I need to be powerful and I need to push you down so that others know that I'm powerful.
Yeah.
And that to me is an old dying paradigm. And a lot of our financial structures, our social structures, our country, there's a lot that's built in that framework of I know best, so I'm going to lead and I'm going to be the big one so that you just lead and don't even think about it because I know the way. And there's enough awareness on a socioeconomic level in people's lives that there's something else being birthed. There's
Yeah.
something else coming forth. So I think, for men, it's finding this dance between, okay, I'm wanting to feel more and express more and tap into my receptivity and creativity, but also know your balls, like know like the power and the strength of like your certainty and like this is what I'm seeding, this is who I am. And it to me it just gets into like the ergonomics of a male body when it comes to procreation. It's like the phallus, the penis, the vajra, whatever word you want to use, rises at a point of focus to then create life.
Right.
The yoni, the vagina, receives seed to then create life. So there's a receptivity in the feminine, there's a penetration in the masculine that actually is what creates life. So those polarities are essential, and they can be embedded into our world. I think sometimes I see people in this conversation of polarity like trying to get rid of polarity. It's like if you get rid of polarity, we're all going to die because we're in these flesh suits that are cells that are positive charges and negative charges that create life. So we can't deny duality trying to transcend duality. We have to master duality in order to actually move into more congruency with how we show up in the state of deeper love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it gets exciting because then we get to redefine all these old paradigms and principles into something new. But the only way we can create new is by dissolving and feeling and evolving out of all of the old stuff that we've been holding on to, especially as men, when we weren't heard and we weren't listened to and we weren't loved, or someone blamed us or shamed us, and all that stuff that gets stuck as emotional energy inside the body.
Yeah, fantastic, and I totally resonate with that. And I'm just curious because obviously you're busy. Your work is flourishing. Is it generally your experience that you're finding more and more men are craving for this? That men are, they're picking up a signal, you could say, of being called to a higher and deeper masculinity, whatever that would mean.
I do, yeah, yeah. And a lot of that I feel like, especially in these spiritual communities, there's enough, women around that are like, "Where are all the men? Where are all the conscious men?" In this conversation, it's like they're here and they're doing their work and they're stepping up and more and that. And it's also I can feel outside because I feel like for a lot of men, their spiritual journey often comes from the female partner saying,
Yeah.
pushing them, come on, come on. And I can relate to that. Definitely many evolutionary places along the way was a woman being like, all right, dude, like, come on, step up, you had some shit to do. And it was beautiful. And I can also feel now there's this deeper willingness inside of a man's body to really meet edges more and more. I mean, I'm seeing this over and over. And what I find, this particular initiation journey retreat, which this year will happen over 5 times in 5 different countries, like I see like this quality and caliber of men. It often, 60-70% of the guys that are coming are holding men's circles. They're really active in their community, and
Interesting.
they're seeking out the next evolution. They've kind of been doing the men's circle thing. They're ready for that, and they're like, okay, there's some other edges that are there. And I
Yeah.
love that because we really, I haven't come across, I don't know obviously all the men's work that happens on the planet. I just know that a lot of the deepest underlying core issues around sexuality, around our trust, around homophobia, all these things that men often will never even talk about in a men's circle. Like that's the place that we go inside these retreats. And, I love that. And it really, I can then know that the man who's coming then makes that much more of an influence back in his community. And I think that's really where this work spreads and grows more and more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. That you said, yeah, a lot of men who've already been doing some circles or work, looking for the next level. Because I feel part of that is it's exemplified also in the dialogue we're having right now. It's like those of us who are, let's say, pioneering this work, we're experimenting. It's just really good to share.
Hmm.
What's going on? What's your experience? What are you bringing to the table? And that kind of brotherhood, because as we know as men, we can easily be the lone wolf. Like, well, I'm doing it my way, I'm doing my thing, and my thing's probably better than his thing because whatever.
Whatever reason is made up.
And I just feel that's something I'm really enjoying, connecting with people like yourself. It's like that sense of being a part of a wider movement, you could say,
Hmm.
of positive masculine initiation, in this time.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's also what we're hoping to do with our documentary is, we're hoping it gets out there, it gets shared, and that we reach a lot more men, but also get a cultural conversation going
Hmm.
about, the whole point of the title, A New Men's Liberation. Well, you don't even have to call it new, because we haven't really had one yet. you know, culturally. We're all familiar with women's liberation, you know, and, you know, obviously that's far from perfect, but, you know, men are suffering under patriarchy just as much as women, actually, but in different ways.
Hmm.
And I always think of this book title by Warren Farrell. You've heard of Warren Farrell? He
Mm,
started
yeah.
off he was a feminist writer and support, and then he shifted to men's work, and he wrote a book called "Women Don't Hear What Men Don't Say."
Mm, mm,
And I think that does exemplify something about this hidden crisis, you know,
hmm, hmm,
that's just there, but is because because and this is also why I feel what we're doing is important. That men have to feel they can speak about it,
mm, hmm,
and obviously in coming together in these contexts and circles is the place it can really happen.
mm,
So that men can start to feel empowered, like, hey, wait a minute, you know, masculinity is not toxic, you know,
hmm.
and you know, start standing up, you know, and bringing a real cultural change, you know, where we're not just allowing ourselves to be our masculinity to be slowly eroded, you know. And as you said, there's this whole kind of, you know, there's all this gender bending going on, and, you know, like now men can have babies, and, you know, you can't even have male and female toilets anymore, for Christ's sake.
Oh,
It's just
crazy.
insane, you know.
Hmm, hmm.
But part of the reason it's happening is because men are letting it happen, you
Yeah,
know. It should be
yeah,
men who are standing up and saying, wait a minute, this is fucking
yeah.
ridiculous, you know. It's not to say, yes, if you're transgender and genuinely transgender, it's fine, but, you know, we as men do not have to bow down to the 3% of the population who's transgender, for example. You know, to me, this
Hmm.
is a big part of the, on a wider cultural scale, the emasculation
Mm,
of our
hmm,
culture.
hmm. Yeah, and there's so many different factors. It's just coming into my awareness. There's a study I read, years ago that has to do with the increase of plastics into our diet, and at the actual shift and change when, the embryo is developing, the fetus is developing inside the womb, that because of the leaching of plastic so much into our diet, that the hormones that are released that make, the male body more hairy and more, masculine that way actually aren't as strong, and also on the vice versa with the female hormones that are released because of that plastic. um, but and I think there's an element of that, and there's this element of this kind of, you could say, you know, yeah, the transgender, pansexual, many identity world and society that we're in. And I celebrate it all. Like I have a wide variety of different individuals that come through to trainings and stuff. And I also just like, I relate to being in this human life journey in a male body. I'm very much in touch to my feminine inside, but I'm in a male body. I have a penis in my base, and it rises, and I'm turned on in that way. It's just, and I can feel that way, and I don't need for everyone else to feel the same, and I celebrate that all. And it's like, I'm not going to shame anyone else. And so why does someone need to shame me in any way? It's just like, and I think there's a certain dynamic in the procreative nature of humanity that is really turned on by polarity. I've never met a single, in doing this work for a long time, a single feminine energy that doesn't have a longing to deeply surrender and to be taken and to be ravished.
Yeah.
I haven't met really a masculine energy that doesn't have a desire inside to penetrate and to take and to consume, with the eyes of love. So these are polarities that are inside, and however they show up inside, I want to master polarity, because when I master polarity, then I have a deeper playground to actually enjoy the human experience and not just be a victim for most of my life. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the culture that we live in is feeding the victim. It's feeding this place that, I need to listen to every single cultural thing before I post or share anything. It's like no matter what we do, I'm sure I'm violating or pissing off someone, and that's okay. That's part of being a human. Is like not everyone agrees with us. So can we be with pain and pleasure the same way and just recognize that they're symbiotically connected?
Yeah, right on. Totally agree. Yeah, and just to say, in our group, in our collective, there's one homosexual guy, one
Mhm.
bisexual, and a transgender. So very interestingly, his name's Alex, but when he was a she, he was in the women's collective for
Mhm.
many years, and for the last few years he made this transition. And so, but what's striking to me is in neither of those cases is it's not even an issue. I mean, when we're together, it's not it's not even an issue. It's like I think part of what's going on culturally is that for a homosexual or a transsexual to be able to be who they are and fully relax into who they are, all the rest of us men need to adjust. You know,
Mhm.
but actually, what we're finding is, a homosexual man, he still has a polarity. He can still
Mhm.
have a strong masculine polarity, and Alex, who's the trans in this transgender journey, he's loving being with us as men, and
Mhm.
because he's a very authentic transgender. He never felt at home in a woman's body, and
Mhm.
when he finally got behind it and recognized it and began the journey, it's just been a huge homecoming. But it's
Mhm.
amazing for him to be with us, to be a part of this collective. But we don't spend a lot of time talking with him about his process, and not any more than any other guy. Do you know what I mean? It's
Exactly.
nothing
Yep.
special. That's the point. It's nothing special. It doesn't have to be something.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm totally with you.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful.
Anyway, lovely to speak with you. Really, really great, and really appreciate the exchange. And it sounds like you're doing fantastic work. Very inspiring.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
don't know if you want to share anything about your book just to finish. I'll put the information in the description so people can find it.
Yeah, I mean it came out in December. It was a bestseller in 7 countries around the world, and
Yeah.
been sharing it around. It's really, it's about 350 pages, so it's an actual book. I say that just sometimes I feel like, anyways, it's a journey into like personal storytelling as well as a lot of practices. So, I found myself having a very similar intake conversation with, the same type of male body over and over, and I was, also felt the desire to write and to share. And yeah, people can really have a pretty profound transformational journey through reading this book. And actually, just at the end, I'm right now teaching a practitioner training in Florida, and at the end, I have about a 4 or 5 day window. I'm going to go record the Audible version of it. So, been getting a lot of requests for the Audible version. That'll be coming out soon, probably in a couple months from now. So,
Great.
um, yeah, it's a journey into embodiment, into really, regaining power and also waking up. The last chapter is around like, what do I do as a soul? How do
Yeah.
I wake up to soul purpose and really live in the world in this way?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I'm really congratulations. I'm happy to hear that it's getting out there, doing that. It's doing so well.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
So I'll include all your information in the description below if any of you want to find out about what Aaron's up to.
Yeah,
So
beautiful.
thank you very much.
Thank
And
you. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation.
yeah, till next time.
Absolutely.